The envelope was shaking in her hands, not because of the cold, though it was February and the wind off Lake Michigan had teeth, but because the name printed in the return address belonged to a dead man, her dead man. The husband she had buried 14 months ago, or thought she had. The man whose grave she had stood at in black heels that sank into wet November earth, holding their 7-year-old daughter's hand while a pastor spoke about the mysteries of God. The name on that envelope was Daniel Mercer, and Daniel Mercer had been dead for over a year. Nora stood on the front step of her Chicago townhouse, staring at the postmark, Phoenix, Arizona, and felt something shift inside her. Not grief, not shock, something colder and far more deliberate. But to understand how she got here, we need to go back to the beginning, to the life she thought she had, and the man she thought she knew. Nora Mercer had married Daniel at 28. He was charming in the way that some men are, effortlessly, dangerously charming, the kind of man who remembered the name of your childhood dog and made you feel like the only person in a crowded room. They built what looked, from the outside, like a beautiful life. A house in Lincoln Park, a daughter named Lily, a marriage that their friends envied at dinner parties. What no one saw was the slow erosion underneath. Daniel was bad with money, in the way gamblers are bad with money, not carelessly, but compulsively. Nora found the first credit card statement 3 years in. $12,000 on accounts she hadn't known existed. He cried. He promised. She believed him. She was good at believing him. She had been practicing for years. By year 6 of their marriage, he had quietly run up nearly $90,000 in debt. Loans taken in both their names, a second mortgage she hadn't signed but somehow had, credit lines extended and maxed and extended again. Nora was a contracts attorney. She was not a stupid woman. But love has a way of blinding even the sharpest minds to the evidence sitting right in front of them, especially when the person you love has spent years learning exactly how to manage your blind spots. She found out the full extent of it not from Daniel, but from a collection agency. A call came to her office in October, 14 months before the envelope arrived on her doorstep. The woman on the phone was businesslike, almost bored. Mrs. Mercer, we're following up on a delinquent home equity loan in the amount of $63,000. Would she like to arrange a payment plan? Nora had sat very still at her desk and said she would call back. Then she had closed her office door, sat down on the floor with her back against the wall, and stayed there for a very long time. She didn't confront Daniel that night. She was a contracts attorney. She gathered evidence first. What she found over the following 2 weeks was methodical and devastating. He had been siphoning money from their joint accounts for years. He had taken out a life insurance policy on himself, a substantial one, with Nora as the sole beneficiary, 18 months prior. He had, she now realized, begun laying groundwork she hadn't recognized as groundwork at the time, increasing the policy, updating beneficiary forms, making sure everything was clean and documented and correct. And then, on a Thursday in November, Daniel Mercer drove his car into the Fox River. The car was found. His wallet was found. His phone. A jacket. The search went on for 11 days. No body was ever recovered. The current, the authorities explained, could carry a body for miles, and the temperatures were already brutal. It happened. Rarely, but it happened. The insurance company stalled, as insurance companies do, but the policy language was clear, the circumstances were ruled accidental, and 14 months later, Nora Mercer received a settlement check for $800,000. She hadn't cashed it. She had been waiting, though she couldn't have told you exactly what for. Something had always been wrong with Daniel's death in the particular way that things are wrong when you knew a person, really knew them, and something in their story doesn't fit. Daniel was terrified of cold water. He had refused to swim in open water since childhood, some fear rooted in a cousin's drowning he'd witnessed at 10. He would not drive across bridges at night if he could help it. The Fox River Bridge, in November, in the dark, had never been a route he took. She had told the detective this. The detective had noted it kindly, and explained that grief sometimes makes us look for reasons where there are none. Nora had nodded, and she had kept waiting. The envelope came on a Tuesday. Inside was a single photograph. No note, no return address beyond the city, of a man with a new beard, lighter hair, standing outside what appeared to be a restaurant patio in desert sunlight. He was laughing at something off camera. He looked relaxed, unburdened, alive. Someone had found him, and someone had wanted her to know. She never learned who sent it. She didn't much care. She had what she needed. Nora took a leave from her firm. She told her partners it was for Lily, which was not entirely untrue, and flew to Phoenix on a Friday morning. She had done 3 weeks of work before she got on the plane. She had a private investigator, a man named Carver, who had been recommended by a colleague, confirm the address within 4 days. She had spoken to a detective in the financial crimes unit of the Chicago PD, who had become, suddenly, very interested in reopening a case that had been closed. She had also, quietly, contacted the insurance company's fraud division. She did not go to the address alone. She went with Detective Reyes, who had flown out with a warrant, and Carver, who knew the building's layout. Nora herself stood slightly behind them on the third-floor walkway of a Phoenix apartment complex in the warm February sun when the door opened. Daniel looked older. The beard was longer in person, more gray than she'd expected. He was wearing a Suns t-shirt and holding a cup of coffee, and for one suspended moment, he simply looked at her the way a person looks at something they cannot process, the way you might look at a ghost. Then he tried to close the door. Detective Reyes had expected that. What happened next was not dramatic, in the cinematic sense. There was no screaming, no tears from Nora. She had already done her crying, alone in Lily's room at night, during the 14 months she had spent being a widow, explaining to her daughter why Daddy wasn't coming home, holding Lily through nightmares, answering the impossible questions children ask with a quietness she had built like armor, brick by brick, over a very long year. She was done crying for Daniel Mercer. She watched them take him into custody with the particular stillness of a woman who has already decided that the best revenge is not a scene. It is a result. Daniel was extradited to Illinois and charged with insurance fraud, financial fraud, and faking his own death, which carries its own ugly bouquet of charges, including obstruction and identity fraud. His legal defense was expensive and largely unsuccessful. The insurance company, galvanized by the fraud division's findings, not only reclaimed their settlement but pursued damages. The DA pursued criminal charges with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for cases that make careers. Daniel's attorney argued that he had been under enormous psychological pressure. The judge was unmoved. He was sentenced to 11 years. Nora didn't attend the sentencing. She took Lily to the aquarium that day. They looked at jellyfish for a long time, and Lily held her hand, and Nora thought about the strange shape a life can take, how you can build something carefully and love it completely, and still have it turn out to be a lie from the foundation up. She thought about all the women who had been exactly where she was, standing in rubble that used to be a marriage, trying to figure out how to keep being a mother, a person, a whole human being, when so much had been taken. She cashed the insurance check eventually. On advice of her attorney, herself, essentially, she placed it in a trust for Lily. She went back to work. She took on more cases. She got very good, her colleagues noticed, at spotting fraudulent contract language, the fine print, the buried clause, the thing that looks like nothing until it's everything. She never remarried, at least not quickly, and not carelessly. Because here's the thing Nora Mercer understood. Standing in the Phoenix sun, watching a man she had loved be led away in handcuffs, the most powerful thing she could do was not collapse. It was not to scream or to beg for an explanation she would never truly understand. It was to simply remain, to be still the woman he had underestimated. That, more than anything, was what he could not take from her, and she made certain, every single day, that he hadn't.